The day my son got married. I wasn't supposed to be there, and that line still sits in my chest like a stone. That morning I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, the whole house holding its breath, quiet in a way that felt unnatural. I didn't have an invitation. I was never given one. Yet my mind kept drifting toward how it all would have looked if I had been included. Sunlight came through the window, scattering little patterns across the table, and I traced them absent-mindedly with my finger, wondering why a mother should ever have to beg for a place at her own son's wedding. I raised that boy, held his hand through every storm, stood behind him even when no one else did. And now he was getting married without me. The thought didn't just hurt. It hollowed something out inside me. I had put water on the stove for tea and completely forgot about it, the kettle screaming louder and louder while my ears refused to catch any of it. Then my phone buzzed across the counter. It was a message from Ms. Penny, our neighbor, saying, "Can you come over? I need to show you something. It's important." I had no idea that her message would change the way I saw my home, my life, and even my son. But to understand that moment, I have to take you back to when things were still normal, when there were no walls between me and my boy, when mornings were simple, when the smell of coffee and toast meant comfort instead of loneliness, when my days at the community center felt warm and familiar. Everything in my little world was steady. The old folks with their stories, my stubborn lavender plant that refused to die, my quiet routines, and my son Aaron was still my son, not a stranger standing at the altar without me. Aaron used to come home late, from work and crash on my couch, like the whole world was sitting on his shoulders, and I would hand him a plate of leftovers before he even asked. He'd talk about his day, complain about his boss, laugh at his own jokes, and sometimes, when he was too tired to hide, he'd admit he was scared about his future, about whether he was doing anything right. And every time I'd tell him the same thing. You don't have to figure out your whole life today, but somewhere along the road, between new friends, new routines, and a girlfriend I barely knew, he started drifting in small, almost unnoticeable ways. First, he'd cancel dinner plans. Then he'd forget to call back. Then he'd stop dropping by unannounced like he always used to. At first, I told myself he was just busy, that this was normal, that kids grow up and need their space. But there was a heaviness in those gaps, a silence that didn't feel like adulthood but like distance, the kind that grows quietly, like a crack in a window you don't notice until the cold starts slipping in. I didn't blame him, not really. Life pulls people in strange directions. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't afraid of losing him to a life where I no longer fit. That fear was sitting deep in my stomach the day Ms. Penny called me. I slipped into my sandals, grabbed my keys, and walked across the yard to her house, still convincing myself that whatever she wanted to show me couldn't possibly make this day any worse. But when she opened her door, her face said otherwise. Worried eyes, lips pressed together like she was bracing for something. She guided me to her living room without a word and pointed at her TV, where a paused video sat on the screen. My heart tightened before she even hit play, as if my body already knew I wasn't going to like what came next. When she pressed play, the room filled with the shaky sound of someone's phone recording, and before the image even sharpened, I recognized the music, wedding music, soft, cheerful, painfully familiar. Then the picture cleared and there he was, my son, my Aaron, standing at the altar in a suit I had never seen, smiling a smile I hadn't been given in a long time, surrounded by people I didn't even recognize. I didn't breathe. I don't think I could. It wasn't just that he was getting married without me. That shock had already settled into my bones. It was how happy he looked, how complete, like nothing in his world was missing, like I wasn't missing. Ms. Penny put her hand gently on my arm, but even her touch felt distant. The camera panned across the guests, and for a second my stomach twisted when I saw familiar faces. His uncles, cousins, old family friends, all sitting there as if it was the most natural thing in the world. People who knew me, people who had eaten at my table, people who didn't even think to ask, "Where's his mother?" I felt something warm hit my cheek and realized it was a tear. Then another, and I wiped them quickly, embarrassed even though it was just me and her. The video kept playing, the vows, the applause, the kiss. and every second felt like it scraped a little more off my heart. By the time it ended, my legs felt weak, like the floor was tilting under me. I didn't speak for a moment. I couldn't. Ms. Penny looked at me with that soft pity I hated, the kind that makes you feel small even when people mean well. She said, "I thought you deserved to know." "I'm so sorry, May." And I nodded because that's all I could manage. But inside, something sharp and cold was spreading. Not anger, not yet. Just a deep, aching confusion. I kept thinking, what did I do? What did I miss? How do you love someone their whole life and still end up standing outside their happiest day? When I finally walked back home, the world felt strangely quiet, almost hollow, as if everything around me already knew a truth. I was only just beginning to see this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Something had pulled my son away from me long before that wedding day, and I was finally about to find out what it was. The truth didn't come to me all at once. It came in little pieces, slow, painful, like peeling back a bandage that's been stuck too long. The first piece arrived 2 days after I saw the wedding video. I was sitting on my porch, sipping the last of my morning coffee, staring at nothing, the kind of staring where your eyes blur and you don't even bother to blink. That's when my neighbor's youngest, little Chloe, came running up the steps to hand me a small envelope. "Mama said this was in our mailbox by mistake," she said, bouncing on her toes. I thanked her, but my hands felt oddly numb as I opened it. Inside was a bridal shower invitation. Not addressed to me, addressed to Ms. Penny, the same neighbor who'd brought me the video. The shower had happened weeks before the wedding. The date hit me first, then the location, their backyard. The backyard right next to mine, a thin wooden fence between us. I swallowed hard. For hours that day, I sat replaying every moment from that week. I had heard music. I had heard laughter. I had even seen extra cars parked along the street. But I'd convinced myself it was just another barbecue or birthday party. Something small, something unrelated to me. Because the truth would have hurt too much. And then came the second piece. Later that afternoon, Miss Penny knocked softly on my door. She held her phone in her hand the way someone holds something fragile, like she wasn't sure if she should offer it to me. Her voice was quiet. "May, I didn't show you everything." My stomach tightened. I nodded slowly, letting her in. She hesitated, searching my face like she was trying to make sure I was strong enough for whatever came next. Then she pulled up a second video. This one wasn't from the wedding. It was from the bridal shower, from that very backyard. The moment it started, I felt my chest tighten. The camera was pointed at a group of women gathered around a table full of gifts, shiny wrapping paper, little white boxes, pastel ribbons. They were all laughing, sipping drinks, talking over each other. And then I saw her, my soon-to-be daughter-in-law, standing in the middle like she owned the air around her. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, that practiced smile of someone who knows everyone is looking at her. Someone asked her about the guest list, something light, teasing, and she rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please," she said, loud enough for the whole circle to hear. "The last thing I need is his mother." Hovering around and judging everything, the women around her laughed. Not unkindly, just thoughtlessly. The way people laugh when they think they're far from the ears that might break at the sound. She continued, flipping her hair with a smirk. "Honestly, I told Aaron I don't want her there. She's overbearing, and she'll make everything about her. She always does." I felt my breath catch. My hands shook just slightly, and I clasped them together to steady them. "Overbearing? Making everything about me? Me?" My voice left me. I couldn't even whisper. The girl kept going, laughing like she was mocking a distant stranger. "And you know how mothers get at weddings. Crying, fussing, giving opinions nobody asked for. No thank you. This is my day." I told him if she comes, I'm not walking down that aisle. My heart didn't break. It folded in on itself, quietly, like paper softening in the rain. When the video ended, I sat perfectly still. Not angry, not crying, just silent. Heavily, deeply silent. Because there in that moment, I realized something I had never considered before. My son didn't forget me. He didn't overlook me. He didn't make a choice on his own. Someone spoke my name with poison in her mouth, and he let it stain him. I looked at Ms. Penny, who was already wiping at her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I just thought you should know." And I thanked her, genuinely, because somehow knowing the truth, as sharp as it was, felt better than sitting in that blind confusion. But that night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow hum of the ceiling fan, replaying every smile, every hug, every childhood birthday, wondering how I became someone that my own child could erase with a single request from someone else, and yet I didn't say a word to him. I didn't call. I didn't confront. I didn't plead. I didn't ask why. I decided I would let the truth reveal itself in its own time, and that time came far sooner and far louder than I ever expected. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind of morning when the house feels softer, when sunlight comes in slow and warm through the kitchen curtains. I was washing a plate, my mind floating somewhere far away, when I heard footsteps on my porch. Heavy ones, familiar ones. Before I could even dry my hands, the door swung open and not knocked, not tapped, opened, and there he was. My son, my Aaron. His face was pale, his eyes wide, almost frantic. He didn't even say hello. He just held up a phone with trembling fingers. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard since he was a little boy. "Why didn't you tell me?" I froze. Not because he'd asked, but because I knew exactly what he had seen. Somehow, someway, he had found the video. I swallowed and stepped aside so he could come in, but he didn't move. He just stood there on the threshold, like crossing into my house required strength. He wasn't sure he had. His jaw clenched. His eyes were wet, angry, ashamed all at once. "How long have you known?" he asked. I took a slow breath, leaning lightly against the back of a chair to steady myself. "A couple of days." He shook his head, his voice low and rough. "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in a long time, he looked like my son again. Not someone distant, not someone controlled, but that same boy who used to sit on the kitchen counter, swinging his legs while telling me about his day. "Because," I said softly, "it wasn't my place to ruin your happiness. I wasn't going to make you choose." His face crumpled, just a little, like the words hit someplace tender and deep. He walked inside slowly, sitting at the kitchen table like he had when he was a teenager, elbows on his knees, hands clasped under his chin. "She said you were overbearing," he said quietly. "She told me you'd make everything dramatic, that you'd embarrass me in front of her family. She said you didn't like her." I closed my eyes for a second. A long second. When I opened them, he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the floor like he saw something there he couldn't undo. I sat down across from him. "Aaron, I've never disliked her. I didn't know her well enough to dislike her." He nodded, shame hitting him so hard it bent his shoulders forward. "I should have known," he whispered. "I should have asked you. I should have—" His voice broke completely then. Not loud, just a quiet, sharp break that seemed to echo in the little room. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "You were trying to keep peace in your home," I said. "I understand that." He shook his head again. "No, I was trying to keep peace with someone who didn't want peace." And then, very slowly, he looked up. His eyes were different, determined, cold with purpose. "We're going over there," he said. "Right now. Both families are at her parents' house for brunch. They're all there. She's there." My heart thudded hard once, a deep warning inside my chest. "Aaron?" "No," he said firmly, pushing back his chair. "I am not letting this sit. I am not pretending nothing happened. She humiliated you. She lied to me. She manipulated our entire wedding. And she laughed about it." I hesitated. Not because I feared drama, but because I feared what this truth would do to him. "Are you sure?" I asked softly. He nodded once. "Mom, I need to hear her say it to my face. And I need them all to hear what she did." He stood waiting for me, and something in his eyes, something wounded, something fierce, told me there was no stopping this. So I grabbed my purse, slipped on my shoes, and walked out beside him. Not as a victim, not as someone seeking revenge, but as a mother who had finally been seen. The drive to her parents' house felt long and tight, filled with a silence that buzzed with things neither of us could bring ourselves to say. When we pulled up, cars lined the driveway and laughter poured from the open windows, warm, cheerful, unaware of the storm about to hit. My son inhaled deeply, steadying himself, and then looked at me. "Stay close," he murmured. And then he opened the door. The moment we stepped inside, the chatter quieted. Eyes turned. Faces shifted from surprise to discomfort to confusion. And then she appeared, my daughter-in-law, walking toward us in a bright dress, smiling wide until she saw me behind him. Her smile fell like a curtain. "Aaron?" she said, her voice lifting unnaturally. "What's going on? You didn't say your mom was coming?" "I didn't know she wasn't welcome," he cut in, his voice sharp and cold enough to freeze the air. The room went still. Her parents exchanged a glance. An aunt stopped mid-bite. Someone's fork clattered softly against a plate. And then my son lifted his phone, pressed play, and the sound of her own voice filled the room. Her laughter, her words. "If she comes, I'm not walking down that aisle." Watching her face drain of color was like watching a truth paint itself, across a canvas for everyone to see. She blinked rapidly, her mouth parting slightly as murmurs spread through the gathered families. "Aaron, that was taken out of context." "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't lie." "Not now." She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she reached for him. I didn't want any drama on our wedding day. I was stressed. You banned my mother," he said, the words hitting the air like stones dropping into water. "You banned her from the most important day of my life. And then you laughed about it." She tried again to speak, but he stepped back, her hand falling uselessly at her side. Her eyes flicked around the room, at her family, then mine, searching for someone to defend her. No one did. Not even her parents. And then his voice lowered, quiet but full of something heavy and final. "Do you know what it feels like," he said, "to watch a video of your own wedding and realize the person you trusted most wanted to erase the woman who raised you?" Her lip trembled. Tears filled her eyes. But he didn't move toward her. He didn't soften. He stood still, breathing deeply, letting her sit in the truth she created. And me? I didn't say a word. I didn't gloat. I didn't glare. I stood behind my son, the same way I had stood behind him his whole life. Quiet. Steady, present. This wasn't my fight. It was his revelation. And it wasn't over yet. She finally spoke, or tried to. Her voice came out thin, shaky, stretched too tight over the mess she'd made. I didn't mean it like that. I was overwhelmed. Your family is big, and I thought your mom would take over the planning. She always has opinions about everything, you know that, Aaron." He cut her off with a look I had never seen on his face before. A look that said he had broken somewhere deep, and the cracks were still spreading. "No," he said softly. "My mom has advice. She has experience. She has care. She has never pressured anyone to do anything. But even if she did, even then, you don't get to decide she doesn't belong in my life." She took a shaky step back, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I was just scared," she whispered. "Your mom she's very—" "Stop talking about her like she isn't here," he said sharply. That made her mouth snap shut. A long moment passed. The kind of moment that changes something in the air, something you can feel but can't name. The families around us shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding eye contact, others staring openly. Finally, my son inhaled slowly, then turned to the room. "I want everyone here to hear this," he said, voice steady but full of hurt. "My mother raised me alone. She worked 2 jobs. She saved for my college. She helped me buy my first car. She never once put herself before me, and she deserved to stand at my wedding." My daughter-in-law squeezed her hands together, her shoulders shaking. He looked at her again. "You deprived her of something I can never give back. And you made me part of it. You let me believe your fear was reality. You made me think my own mother would somehow ruin our day," she whispered. I'm sorry, but it sounded small, almost automatic, like she was saying it because she had run out of excuses. My son shook his head slowly. Are you sorry because you hurt her? Or because you got caught? Her face crumpled. She didn't answer, which was an answer all on its own. Her father stood then, clearing his throat. Aaron, son, maybe we should sit down and talk privately. No, Aaron's voice was firm. This doesn't happen in private. She made a decision in public. She mocked my mother in public. And now the truth is public. The room stayed painfully still. For a moment, I wished I could step in. Not to protect her, but to shield my son from the pain in his own voice. But this was his moment, not mine. He continued, softer now. You should have told me you didn't want her there. I would have shown you the door instead. That line hung in the air like smoke, thin, curling, impossible to ignore. His wife sobbed harder, covering her face, but he didn't move toward her. Not this time. He let the distance sit. Let her feel the weight of it. I loved you, he said quietly. But I can't build a future with someone who thinks she has the right to erase my past. Her knees buckled slightly, and her mother rushed to steady her, whispering frantically. Still, she didn't defend herself. She didn't deny it. She didn't explain. She just cried, not for me, not for the hurt, but for the consequences finally touching her skin. Then my son turned to me. Mom, he breathed, eyes red. I am so sorry. It wasn't a soft apology. It wasn't a polite one. It was raw, thick with pain and guilt and love. I should have seen it, he said. I should have listened to my gut when things felt off. But I didn't. And I can't change the wedding day, but I can change today. He reached for my hand, held it tight. And in that small gesture, warm, steady, trembling, I felt something inside me finally unclench. But the silence around us was swelling. People watching, whispers starting. And from the corner of the room, my daughter-in-law's voice cracked out again. Aaron, you can't just walk away, she cried. We're married. He looked at her with a calmness that scared even me. I know. And you're just, what? Ending things because of one mistake? One mistake? He repeated. His voice was quiet but sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. You didn't just keep my mom off the guest list. You manipulated me. You humiliated her. You started our marriage with cruelty, and you did it while smiling. She staggered, shaking her head as if denying reality would make it disappear. I can fix it. I'll apologize to her. This isn't about apologies, he said. This is about who you chose to be. She stared at him like he had hit her. You made me choose between you and the one person who has always been in my corner. And now you're shocked that I'm choosing the one who never asked me to betray anyone to love her. She sank down onto a chair, sobbing uncontrollably while her mother rubbed her back. My son turned to me again, lowering his voice. Mom, let's go. And just like that, he chose. Not because I asked, not because I forced anything, but because truth had finally taken the wheel. As we walked out of that house, every eye followed us, some wide with shock, some heavy with sympathy, some quietly judging. But none of it mattered. Not compared to the weight of my son's hand holding mine. We stepped outside into the sunlight, the door closing behind us with a soft final click. He exhaled, shoulders sagging as though he had been carrying a boulder on his chest, and finally put it down. I need space from her, he said quietly. Maybe a separation? Maybe more. I don't know yet. He looked at me, eyes tired but clear. But whatever happens, you're not losing me again. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I believed him. He wasn't a little boy anymore. He wasn't a man under someone else's thumb. He was my son again. And that was enough for now. We sat in his car for a long time, the engine off, the world muted except for the soft clicking of the cooling metal, and his uneven breathing, and he kept staring at his hands like he didn't recognize them anymore, like they belonged to the version of himself that let someone else control his voice. Then he finally whispered, Mom, how did I not see it? And I reached over, rested my hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension still trapped under his skin, and told him gently that love can make good people overlook bad signs, that wanting peace can sometimes make us ignore war happening right in front of us. And he swallowed hard before nodding, wiping his face with his sleeve like he used to do as a kid after crying too hard, during a scraped knee moment. Then he muttered that he needed air. And we ended up walking the length of the quiet street, the late afternoon sun dipping low, casting long shadows that seemed to follow our footsteps as he talked through everything. How she'd started isolating him, how she framed every concern as protecting their future, how he'd mistaken control for love. And the more he spoke, the freer he sounded. Like every word chipped away at something heavy inside him until he finally stopped, breathed deeply, and said he needed to stay with me for a while. So we drove home. And when he carried his overnight bag into the house, the place felt warm in a way it hadn't for months, like the air itself exhaled with relief. And later that night, he sat at my kitchen table eating leftovers, the same way he used to after football practice, quiet but calmer, telling me he planned to talk to her again, calmly, directly, because he needed closure more than anger. And I didn't push him one way or the other, didn't judge, didn't guide, just listened, letting him find his own footing again. And when he finally stood up to go to bed, he hugged me long and tight. The kind of hug that says thank you without words. The kind of hug that stitches broken things a little bit back together. And as he went down the hall, shoulders a little less heavy, steps a little more sure, I whispered a silent prayer for whatever came next. Not for revenge, not for punishment, just for truth and strength and a future where he no longer had to shrink himself to fit someone else's comfort. But even as I settled into bed, exhaustion tugging at my bones, I knew this wasn't over, because people like her don't let go easily. And sure enough, the next morning before the sun had fully risen, someone started banging on my front door like they were trying to break the wood in half. The banging didn't stop, not even for a breath. And I hurried to the door with my robe still half tied, already knowing in my gut who it was, and when I opened it, there she stood, my daughter-in-law, with mascara smeared under her eyes, hair messy like she'd been pulling at it all night, breath fast and shallow. And before I could even speak, she pushed past me into the living room, pacing like a storm trapped inside four walls, saying she needed to talk to Aaron, that she'd been calling him non-stop, that he was ruining everything. And I told her calmly that he was sleeping, that we could wait until he woke up. But she spun on me with a look so sharp it almost felt like a slap, accusing me of turning him against her, calling me manipulative, saying I had wanted this from the beginning. And I stood there quietly, letting the venom fall, because I knew it wasn't truth, it was fear. But then Aaron's footsteps came down the hallway, slow, tired, but steady. And the moment she saw him, she rushed forward, grabbing his arm like she was trying to anchor herself to him, crying that she'd made a mistake, that she only said those things at the bridal shower because she was nervous and trying to impress her friends, that she didn't mean any of it. And he gently pulled his arm free. Not harsh, not dramatic, just enough to make it clear that the old dynamic between them had ended. He told her in a quiet voice that he heard her apology, but he didn't trust it, that an apology doesn't erase intention, that belittling someone behind their back isn't an accident. It's a choice, and she begged him, hands gripping together, shoulders trembling, to at least come home, to talk privately, to try again. But he looked her in the eye and said something so heartbreakingly calm that even I felt the room shift. I need to be somewhere I'm not, forced to choose between the person I love and the person who raised me. And she went still, like his words froze her. Then she asked, barely above a whisper, "So what now? You're choosing her over me?" And he shook his head and said, "No, I'm choosing honesty over pretending," which made her face crumple completely as she realized she couldn't twist that into something else. She cried harder, saying she'd do anything. She'd apologize to me. She'd apologize to the whole family. She'd make a public post if she had to. But he told her that wasn't the point, that public gestures don't fix private character. And she must have felt the finality in his tone because she suddenly straightened, wiped her cheeks and said with this coldness creeping back into her voice, "Fine, if you walk out now, don't expect me to be waiting when you come crawling back." And he just nodded actually nodded and said, "If that's your choice, then that's your choice." And she stared at him like she didn't recognize him anymore. Like the version she controlled had vanished overnight, and then she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled on the wall, leaving a heavy silence behind that neither of us rushed to fill. The moment the door slammed behind her, the whole house felt heavier than before, like her anger had left an imprint on the air, and Aaron just stood there, staring at the floor, breathing slowly like he was trying to steady himself. And for a second I wanted to say something comforting, but I also knew he needed space to process what had just happened. So I simply sat down on the couch and waited, giving him a moment to decide whether he wanted to talk or be silent. And after a long pause, he finally sat beside me, elbows on his knees, rubbing his temples as if the situation was pounding inside his head. He didn't cry, he didn't shout. He just looked exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from one argument, but from months of swallowing things to keep the peace. And he whispered, almost like a confession, "I think she only wants me when she feels like she's losing me," which broke my heart more than anything she had said earlier, because it meant he had been living in this push and pull cycle long before the bridal shower incident, long before he finally told me the truth, and I asked him gently whether he thought things could actually change if he went back. And he shook his head without hesitation, saying that every apology from her came with strings attached, that every time she messed up she would promise change. But as soon as things got comfortable again, she'd go right back to belittling him, controlling who he spoke to, even questioning his loyalty to his own family. He said he didn't want a relationship built on fear, fear of upsetting her, fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing himself, and I just listened. Because I knew he wasn't just talking to me. He was admitting it to himself too, maybe for the first time. After a while, he said he needed fresh air, so we stepped outside onto the porch where the morning light was just beginning to warm the sky, and he leaned against the railing, staring into the quiet street, saying softly that maybe this breakup was the only thing that could stop the situation from getting worse, maybe even prevent it from turning toxic beyond repair. But before he could finish that thought, his phone buzzed again, her name lighting up the screen, and he froze, torn between guilt, habit, and a tiny flicker of hope that maybe this time would be different. Yet he didn't pick up. Instead, he turned the phone face down on the railing and let out a long, shaky breath, whispering, "I can't keep doing this." And for the first time since all of this began, I actually believed he was ready to walk away, not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of self-respect, out of the need to find peace again. The next morning, everything felt strangely calm, like the storm had finally exhausted itself, and Aaron woke up early, made himself coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a clarity in his eyes I hadn't seen in months. He told me he'd decided to end things for good, not in anger, not in drama, but in a way that would let him move forward without carrying the weight of regret. So he drafted a long message to her, explaining that the relationship had turned into a cycle where both of them were hurting, more than healing, and that no matter how much love once existed, it wasn't enough to survive without trust, respect, and honesty. He told her he wished her well but needed to choose a life where he didn't feel like he was constantly being tested or torn between two sides, and after reading the message 3 times, he hit send, placing his phone face down as if he knew reopening the conversation would only drag him back into the same emotional loop. She replied within minutes, first begging, then blaming, then apologizing again. But he didn't answer this time. He had finally reached a point where peace mattered more than chaos. By the evening, she sent one last message saying she understood, that she wouldn't contact him again, and that maybe letting go was the only way either of them would ever become better versions of themselves, and true to her word, the calls and texts stopped. The house felt different, lighter, quieter, and for the first time in a long while, Aaron looked relieved instead of torn, like he could finally breathe without bracing for the next argument. He spent the next few days focusing on himself, cleaning out old messages, returning her belongings, reflecting on how easily love can turn into obligation when communication breaks down, and through it all, he stayed calm and grounded, choosing closure instead of conflict. Eventually, life settled into a calmer rhythm, and though the breakup hurt, it also taught him what kind of love he deserved. One where he didn't have to shrink himself to keep someone else comfortable. One where loyalty didn't require losing family, and one where respect wasn't conditional. And as for me, I watched him rebuild himself piece by piece, proud that he'd finally walked away from something that was breaking him, and grateful that in the end he chose truth, peace, and self-worth over the noise of a relationship that had lost its way. And that, ultimately, became the quiet but powerful ending to their story. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end, thank you. Stories like mine aren't always easy to tell, but if it connected with you, even in a small way, that means everything to me. And if you want to hear more real stories, more honest moments, and more of this journey we all share, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new chapter when it drops. And before you go, I want to ask you one thing. What would you have done if you were in my place? Tell me in the comments. I'm listening.